Okay, all right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our second live speaker series. My name is Faisal Osman. I'm one of the core members of Power PDX. And just to remind you all again, Power PDX is the group, and our vision is to take on systemic oppression from an intersectional point of view. Power PDX aims to give youth a place to connect, grow, and organize through the potency of youth power. And we do this by centering BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color, and queer stories and voice through the crossroads of story, music, visual art, and activism. And so how that's been looking for us this month is that every Monday we have a radio show. We're on X-Ray FM. And on Thursdays, we have a sing out on Instagram Live where we showcase artists and poets and different performers. And then on Sundays, so today we have our speaker series. Last week, I had Asku Sangolo on here. And this week, I'm really happy to have Tasneem. Tasneem is one of my good friends who I've known for a few years now. But she's also an artist and an activist and a really important person. So Tasneem Sarkez is a youth artist who works with a variety of media. Her work centers on the experience of being Arab American, first generation, and a Muslim female. Tasneem constantly incorporates aspects of her culture, family history, themes of nostalgia, diaspora, and racism into her work. By engaging people with work about her identity, she's pushing to represent stories that are overlooked. I want to repeat that. She's pushing to represent stories that are overlooked. Tasneem is a great artist, and again, I'm really excited to have her on here and just have a conversation with her. She'll be showing us some of her art, and she'll just be talking about, again, things that are important to her and her values and just what pushes her as a person.
Thank you for that.
Yeah. And so did you want to add anything to that?
No, you got it pretty well.
Okay, great. So I'm going to start off with asking you some questions. Yeah. And so my first question for you today is, what does intersectionality mean to you? And how does it show up in the work that you do?
I think intersectionality is a big thing that is often, overlooked when it comes to activism. I think a lot of people, when they are engaging in activism, whether that's through art or speaking or whatever that looks like for them, they often, focus on whatever is like impacting them or maybe their friend without realizing that this issue also affects something kind of more than themselves and maybe an identity that they would not think that directly relates to that issue. Like, for example, I know for me, it wouldn't make sense for me to make art that is strictly about like being Arab if I wouldn't also make it about gender at the same time, because ethnicity also relates to gender when you look at how different cultures respond to people stepping out of gender norms, because it definitely looks different across all ethnicities. So intersectionality is definitely a lot about looking at where things overlap and where there's similarities and where there's differences. So intersectionality for me is basically looking at like religion, race, even like immigration with like my family, gender, and seeing where all of those issues or where all those like aspects of my identity overlap, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. I think it is interesting to look at it, especially when you're looking at religion and ethnicity and gender. It's because I think that a lot of times people see those separate identities as monoliths and that everyone's the same, but there's huge diversities in all of those ways that we categorize identity. A big example of that is like us right now. Like, we're both Muslim, but we both have very different ethnicities and different genders. And, I would say that our experiences aren't the same. We might share some similarities, but I know that there's a lot of differences, being a Black Muslim and being a Muslim man.
Yeah, totally. You just have to look at like every component of your identity, and like almost like kind of like a Venn diagram. Like if you took like a bubble for everything that you identify as, whether that's like LGBTQ, disabled, gender, whatever, and just like drawing those circles and seeing where they overlap. Eventually they all overlap, of course, in my opinion, because they make up you. So making sure to be an advocate for just all of those things, and also the people who are left out of whatever you may identify with, is also really important, because you can be like intersectional, I guess, about your identity, and like, but you also have to think about who you're not advocating for, because that's also another aspect of intersectionality too.
Yeah, definitely. And that leads right into my second question, which is, what issues do you see when it comes to addressing intersectionality in your community?
A lot of people separate like religion and like culture and gender from each other. I see that a lot, especially in like the Arab Muslim community. And I think that's not good, because there's a lot of issues with the way like Arab women and Muslim women in general are like treated by a lot of like men systematically, whether that's like in the Arab world or here. And I think people just have a hard time kind of looking at things on its own without realizing like why culture, maybe why religion sometimes impacts the way people act towards like other groups. And especially now with like non-Black Muslims engaging with Black Muslims, or like the stereotypes they hold towards Black Muslims, like people tend to have like a narrow view of who's Muslim, who's not, and like who's like one of the good ones and who's like not good. And I think it's very like linear, and people don't realize how connected everything is.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely. I see that a lot in the Muslim community as well. Um, and so my next question for you, so again, Youth Power PDX, we value intersectionality. We talk a lot about the importance of that. And a lot of our work also is around prioritizing youth voice. And so my next question for you is, what do you believe needs to happen in order for adults to prioritize youth voice?
Well, I think adults need to get out of like the authoritative like mindset they have when engaging with youth. It's like kind of the same way seniors interact with freshmen, kind of that mentality of like, I'm older than you, I know more than you, and like kind of like a little bit arrogant about it. And I think adults kind of do the same thing, and especially like teachers and students. And I think if adults just look to the student as if like they're an adult themselves, or just kind of treat them as like an ordinary person, I think they could get a lot of value from learning what that student has to say, because oftentimes youth aren't taken seriously, and a lot of adults would think that they're trying to make the problem seem like bigger than what it actually is. Like, you don't know the world, you don't know anything, like you're just making it seem like it's this big deal when it's not. you know most of the times it's definitely not, but I think adults are constantly thinking like, oh, because they're young, they don't know about the world as much, therefore what they're talking about isn't valid. So I think they just have to see them kind of like on the same level as they are, you know.
Yeah, definitely. And I even think that that's another layer of intersectionality, age. And I think, you know, like you said, you're a young Arab American Muslim woman. And so I want to ask you, like, what do you envision as liberation for yourself? That's a loaded question.
That's a very loaded question. I think it like comes in pieces, if that makes sense. Like, you obviously can't get all of it at once, but like for me, I can remember a moment of liberation was like skating, for example. Oftentimes a lot of like Arab Muslim women, or just like Muslim women in general, are like kind of kept in a box like this by the greater society, and even like their family, as in like you have to act proper, you have to be like very ladylike, and just a lot of the typical female gender norms, but the Arab community like really pushes it on women especially. And when I was skating, I found a lot of like liberation through that because for once I was doing something that wasn't traditionally ladylike or wasn't something that was a normal thing for an Arab Muslim girl to do. So that in and of itself was like liberating. And I was like, wow, like there's probably not too many who are doing this back in the Arab world. And I know people do. There's like a bunch of organizations like Skateistan, and there's like one in like based in Palestine, and they get a lot of youth and young girls to skate too. But it's kind of moving really slowly. So it'll take time, obviously, but definitely that was like a moment of liberation. I was like, I feel like a real anomaly of my culture right now, like on this board. And I think that's why I like it so much, because it gives you a sense of liberation in ways that I don't think a lot of like white skaters would get.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's really cool to see that as a piece of liberation. And I asked that question because last week I kind of asked the same question to Asakulu, but I asked him more like, what does Black liberation mean to you? And the reason that I asked that question is because I think that when we think about liberation and freedom for all, it's important to realize that a lot of people have different definitions of that. And so it's interesting to see what it means for everyone. And like, for me personally, I wonder a lot, like how can you reach liberation? Or what does it look like to reach collective liberation for everyone when everyone has different ideas of what that means?
Yeah, I feel like in a simple way, I guess I would see liberation as, I guess for like Arab Muslim women, is being able to do something that's traditionally seen as like bad or haram or in general just not acceptable for women to do, and then being able to do that. Like when women in Saudi Arabia were allowed to drive like a couple years ago. Like that's an act of liberation. And I think when those acts are happening continuously, then we'll be able to reach a point of like ultimate liberation where anything a Muslim woman or an Arab Muslim woman does won't be seen as like weird just because she's a lady. It'll just be like normal, you know? So yeah, I think the more that builds up, especially in the Arab world and even in America too, because there's definitely a lot of like stereotypes of what Arab Muslim girls are supposed to be in America by like a majority of like white students. So it'll look different around the world, but it's still kind of the same of being able to break out of the stereotype within your own culture and even to other people who know you.
Yeah, definitely. And that makes me think a lot about the way culture and religion clash. I feel like I don't know if you hear about this a lot in your, you probably do it in your community, but like there's a lot of things that we do in our culture that is considered like not okay with our religion, and there's a lot of things that like that I think that there's a lot of times culture reinforces like patriarchy and sexism and racism at times, whereas religion doesn't do that. And especially, I think personally that Islam, there's no place for that. In that, like, you know, Islam is a religion of peace, and it talks a lot about justice. And when we look at the Quran, we even see that there's many pieces in many parts of the Quran that talk about seeking justice and speaking justice and being a person who's kind and just. And so, yeah, I think it's interesting to see the difference that, or the different values that cultures can reinforce that's not the same as what our religion encourages.
Yeah, for sure. Patriarchy transcends religion, and that's just global. Like you see patriarchy, like the issue of patriarchy everywhere, America, literally any other country, which kind of goes to show how separate that is from religion and how men in particular in leadership roles are able to take religion and kind of manipulate it to support their actions of like dominance over people and women in particular.
Yeah, definitely. And I've seen that a lot. And I think that I've even, like, as a male, that I've participated in that. Um, but yeah, I think it's so interesting how, like, sometimes that a lot of those ideas of patriarchy that's in our culture will be like translated into something that that Islam wants, and that it's taken me a lot of unlearning to realize that that's not true, and it's also made me realize that like our Quran and our religion gives women a lot of rights, and has given women rights way before any other religion or any other culture has, or it has given opportunities for women that weren't there from other communities.
Yeah, a lot of the art I do, like a lot of my art kind of touches on like each thing of like immigration, being first gen, and also like being a female in this community a lot. And that reminded me of a drawing actually, because I was looking at my sketchbook, like thinking. Um, so there's like a traditional dress for women that wear the hijab called like an abaya, which it's basically kind of like a long black or whatever color kind of button up. It's like floor length. And I started this like little drawing series of where I had women in the abaya with a ski mask on and them doing something that was seen as like not correct or like not right for that Muslim woman to do. And I thought it was pretty funny, not gonna lie. But I'll show it here. So she's basically wearing this t-shirt. It's like, you know, America, they'll have those like cheap t-shirts where it's like a bikini body printed onto it, and like people will like wear it and they'll be like, oh my god, look, this is like my
Yeah.
body, when it's like the t-shirt. So like did one of like a 4th of July theme on top of her abaya, because I thought one is like, you know, obviously controversial if she's like wearing this whole modest outfit with a t-shirt on top that's like a woman in a bikini, because obviously those are two very different things, you know, two very different expectations of like beauty standards and like how women dress. And I put the ski mask on because I think there's a lot of similarities between how that's quickly villainized and the same way the hijab is quickly seen as like someone who's oppressed or even just like a bad person in general just because they're Muslim. And both the ski mask, depending on the kind of hijab, whether it's like a niqab or whatever, it's just covering your hair. So I was thinking, wow, they're like a lot more similar than you would think, but they're both just as like criminalized. Whenever we see a ski mask, people tend to think of like robbers or just like scary people, like they don't know the face behind it. And I think that's the same reaction a lot of people have to the hijab in America. They're kind of intimidated by it. So I had them wear it and just this t-shirt on top, just for the sense of like creating something that was provocative. And I kind of do that a lot with a lot of things I draw or even paint, because the whole idea is if you continue to like push the boundaries of what is expected of Muslim women, eventually we'll reach a point where whatever it is they do will be seen as like normal or even like really good, and there won't be any sort of like negative judgment or like harsh judgment towards them for doing whatever it is they want to do. So yeah, that was just one drawing I like thought of immediately.
Yeah, that's really dope. It's all about creating your own narrative, and I appreciate that. And so my next question for you, I think that we've kind of talked about it a lot throughout this discussion, but it was, how do you see art being used as activism? In what ways, and what ways have you used art in your organizing?
Art is definitely a form of activism. I think you can make the case that all art is political in a sense. There's definitely a lot of arguments if you like kind of research it. I know there's like books and videos about it, but especially for me, considering like me producing it itself and the message that I put into the work, wherever that ends up being, whether that's like in a show or just like online, people seeing it in itself as a form of activism, because I am either criticizing something about like my identity and want something to change. I'm trying to show an aspect of my culture, whether that's like food or growing up first generation American. And in general, the art I produce, when it's seen in a public space or just online, I'm normalizing my identity or trying to get people to learn more about it. And because it's often like overlooked, misrepresented, or just like manipulated, and I think that's really bad, especially looking at like the news and the media, particularly about like Arab Muslims. and Muslims just in general, regardless of race. And by being able to engage with people with like my experience, that in and of itself is activism to me, because I'm getting people to think about something that they might not normally think about when it comes to Arab Muslims, because a lot of people would like think of terrorism and that's kind of it, and a lot of people tend to be really scared, you know, of Arab Muslims, and you know that's a whole thing of xenophobia. So the more that I try to like push different aspects of Arab culture or like family history and try to get that out there and talk to people about it and engage with conversations, show it through art, people are able to kind of like digest the art piece itself by connecting it to whatever it is I'm saying, and then, you know, kind of registering with it and being like, okay, I learned something today, you know?
Yeah, definitely. Um, and so have you ever felt um, pushback from adults or just other people in your community with a lot of the art that you do?
Definitely. I remember this was like about the same drawing I showed earlier. When I did like my internship, I showed it to the artist I was working with, because I told her like I want to work on like this theme and like maybe produce something like that. And I remember she was kind of like, well, don't you think that's kind of like scary? Like she was thinking about like, what if people see this image and they think that you are saying that like Muslim people are terrorists? And in my mind, I was like, first of all, they would read the artist statement next to it and clearly know it's like, I'm not trying to say these people are terrorists. Like, just when she said that, I just remember thinking like, she just has a certain image of Muslim people and wouldn't think that what I'm doing was the correct way of doing it. And she was like trying to get me to do something that wasn't as like provocative or wasn't as like scary, especially to like white people. And I was like a little thrown off by that. I was like, okay. But and even sometimes like my parents will think I'm like kind of pushing it like with whatever it is I'm doing. They're like, oh, you don't want to do that. That's like not good. People would, you know, it'll bring shame. Not shame. They didn't say that literally, but they wouldn't want me to produce something and have it be like so far out, and then people come to them being like, is this your daughter? Like, what is that? Because collectivist cultures like the Arab world have a really big thing for like saving face and like preserving the family name. So yeah, in some ways, like even in my mind, I'm like, I don't want to produce something that would like make me and like my family look bad, because a lot of like other Arabs would associate whatever I do like instantly like with my family, and if they don't like it, you know, they would like blame it on them. So yeah, I've definitely had pushback from it.
Yeah, definitely. No, I agree with how that works in collectivist cultures. I think I see that a lot in my own culture as well. Um, where yeah, people are sometimes afraid to do things that isn't considered normal because of the shame that comes along with it. Um, but yeah, I still think it's dope that that you're following your own path as an artist, and I think it is like it's just really cool that you're using art as a means of activism, um, because I think that a lot of times when we think about activism, we don't think about art. We think about we think about policies, or we think about politics. But I think that a lot of times, like you said, like art is political, and art within itself, I think, just amplifies like the artist that it amplifies the voices of artists, who a lot of who are the voices that like a lot of people don't or the voices that a lot of like politicians or people talk about, without really looking into like who these artists are and what they do. But I also just feel like using a creative outlet as a way to make change is like it's innovative, and I think it's something that could really change our world, and it's something that, going into the future, will be a way to make change.
Imagery is very powerful. Like for me especially, and a lot of other people, simply seeing an image there's a lot of words to it, you know, even though there's no words. So it's very, I think, it's a different way of trying to get a message across that I think a lot of people can kind of take in easier. And I was watching the new like Michael Jordan documentary that came out that a lot of other people have been watching. It's called like Last Dance. And I was kind of obsessed with like basketball imagery just like from watching it. And I was trying to think of like how can I connect something about basketball to like my identity, and instantly I thought about like jerseys and the way, you know, every team has their own jersey, you know, you have your name, your number, and it's like specific to the individual, and it's like your group identity. And that reminded me of these vests that a lot of like Libyan men wear on Eid, and even like a lot of other cultures on Eid, like men tend to have like a certain, you know, like outfit, whether it's like a longer dress, but in particular Libyan men have their own vest. And I was like, this kind of looks like a jersey, and it's kind of similar in the sense that when you're wearing the jersey, you know, you're representing your team and it's like your thing, your number. In the same way, the Libyan vest is you're representing your culture, your identity, you're a part of that group, but it's, you know, it's individualized because, you know, you pick the color and style you like. And so I was like looking at how similar jerseys and like ethnic clothing are, because it's like a representation of a group identity. So I found like this one picture of like Michael Jordan and all these like people holding up jerseys, and I cut out like just on another piece of paper and drew the Libyan vests instead and like had them hold it. And this was just like an idea that I want to expand on further. Like definitely want to do it with like a painting or something, but this was like just to get it out there. I'll show it, but instead of like jerseys, they're holding like a traditional Libyan vest. And I just thought that was like an interesting image to see, because it's, you know, not what you would expect. And if you, whether it's like a painting or like a photo, I'd manipulate. When people see that, they're like, oh, that's not a jersey. It's, you know, they'd obviously read the statement and learn that it's like a Libyan vest, but it would get them to see how valuable that vest is to Libyan culture, in the same way like our culture in America loves basketball, and like being able to wear a jersey of like our favorite player and kind of have that like group mentality. In the same way, Libyan people, and just traditional clothing in general for any culture, that sense of like belonging to that community you are in and like wearing it. So ever since I like watched that documentary, I was just like thinking about like basketball culture in America and like how that overlaps with you know, Libyan culture. And I just thought of those vests and how that's like a funny image to see, because then it also like just normalizes ethnic clothing in general, like just non-Western clothing. Because anytime someone wears something that's like just a representation of their culture, a lot of people in America are kind of like, whoa, like what is that? Like they're very like distant to it. So if you're able to kind of like normalize that by like inserting it into like American things, it like kind of gets them to think about, or gets them to recognize why they might have that like weird reaction to like not like it, or kind of push that away when you like normalize it in like American places. That also reminds me of like a photo project I did like a couple days ago. It was kind of funny. I wore a jalabiya. Do you know what that is? I'm sure you know.
No, can you talk about
Really?
what that is? I
Oh,
think maybe I might know it with a different name.
it's basically like, it's kind of like an abaya, like a floor length kind of gown, but it's like super colorful, and you can get it in like red, pink, and it's like just kind of detailed. It's like a fancier abaya you would like wear on Eid maybe, or just, it's like definitely more colorful. Maybe it's more of like an Arab thing. I know it's like more common in North Africa. I know the Middle East kind of has like a different thing, but it's just like kind of like a dress up outfit, and I wore it around downtown Portland in like touristy spots, and it was really funny to see the way people reacted. Like when I like walked all over downtown with it, and I had like a jacket on top, but we would like pause at like Powell's bookstore, Waterfront, I'm trying to think, Washington Park, and we were like taking photos because the project I had was kind of similar to the jersey drawing I just showed about like normalizing Arab clothing in Western spaces and kind of looking like a tourist in America. And yeah, exactly like that. So I like wore that, and it was just all about normalizing the way in which we see Western clothing in like traditional American and like white places in Portland, and also the first generation experience having an aspect of your culture that's often, you know, always like in the backbone of your mind while also living in America, and like being able to balance both cultures. And so me wearing that as a first generation person in a place I grew up in that's fairly white and being able to like balance both cultures. So I'm excited to see how the photos turn out because we took them on film yet, but I definitely got the inspiration for it after I did the Michael Jordan drawings. I was like, how can I like bring this to real life? And I think one of the pictures we took, we were at Voodoo Donuts, and I like posed in front of the line, and I looked like a tacky tourist. I was like this to the sign, and all the white people, it was like all white people in the line, they were just looking at me like, whoa, like what is she wearing? And I remember I told my friend, I was like, get a picture of them looking at me because this is exactly like what I want to show in a photo, the way in which white people are so easy to kind of like, you know, quickly make a judgment about clothing that they aren't familiar with.
Wow. That's really exciting though. Keep us posted on that art piece. I really want, like, keep us posted. Let us know when it's done. I really want to post that on our page. And I think that's a really cool idea.
The goal is to get it, have the photos like developed and edited by July 4th, because I want to like release them on that day, because 4th of July is a very interesting holiday for a lot of first generation people, not even just like any person of color in this country. So I want to like try and have that done by that day because I think it definitely relates to my experience.
Yeah, for sure. Um, and so my next question for you is, what pushes you to do the work that you do?
I mean, I was always like doing art since like elementary school, but I don't think I didn't make art specifically about like identity until kind of like my towards the end of sophomore year, but pretty much junior, senior year, it was like constant work about identity. And I think what pushes me to make it is the fact that I kept thinking of something new every time I finished a piece. I kept thinking of, oh, well, what about this idea that I just noticed in my last piece? I was like, well, now I have to make something about that again. And then I would just be on this like constant loophole of like, oh, wait, this piece reminds me of that. Let me do something about this idea. And so the fact that I was like on this constant, I don't know what's the word, but just constantly having all these ideas that bounced off of each other and wanting to, you know, work on it through art, that kind of kept me going because I just got excited. I was like, ooh, this is something fun for me to do now. Like I can do this. So I did it. And also it's just personally the best way for me to talk about my identity because it's easier for me to get out thoughts and feelings into a piece of paper rather than like explain it to people right off the bat. Because if I can make it in a piece, then explain the piece, it's a lot easier for me to kind of get into that conversation than if I were to just like be like a typical politician or a public speaker and just like say those things. So
Yeah, definitely. And then like I really like your style of art, and I think it's cool how you mix art with your ethnicity and just like your own experience. And I know that like you did art for your school, where I think you had art like on a whole entire wall, and like you go to Lincoln, which is like a school that is very white, and I would say like centers whiteness. And so I want to ask you like what was that experience like, and what inspired you to do that art, and what was that process like?
I did that like mural my sophomore year, and a lot of people would be like, oh, it's just like a wall, like why am I so attached to it? But it honestly kickstarted everything art related for me, like literally everything after I finished that mural. And I think it's just because a lot more people, I guess, like kind of like noticed it, and then they like knew me through that mural. And even though it wasn't something that exactly related to like culture and ethnicity in a way, it did for me. And having like all these freeform shapes at the same time being with like super sharp straight lines, the whole piece to me was about like the culture of like perfection and spontaneity, and how oftentimes I feel like restricted to kind of be more spontaneous. And a lot of that tends to be because of overarching issues about like personal freedom and like the lack of thereof as a person of color in America, and like Islamophobia and all these other things that are like kind of hanging over my head, restricting me from being able to do things I'd want to do, whether that's like literally or even just like mentally being able to like speak out about certain things because I feel like I shouldn't. So that whole piece was about kind of like being caught between two spots of like wanting to do something on a whim or just wanting to do anything, but being prevented by doing it. But it, to a lot of people, it's just like a bunch of shapes on a wall. Like you wouldn't get that message at all. Um, and even then, even though like whether it's a person of color, even if they don't make art that's like directly related to identity, when you get to know like the artist and like the meaning behind the piece, that is, you are, I guess, kind of looking at a voice, whether the voice of the artist, that is often like overlooked. And it tends to be kind of like it tends to be, you know, kind of put into a box. Like art museums, when you look at like exhibits of like Native American art or African art, it's, they tend to put that label into a typical stereotype. Like the Portland Art Museum rarely has contemporary art, just like modern art from Native Americans, but it'll all just be like artifacts and like all these like older things. Not to say that it's like wrong to do so, but the lack of centering art made by like young Native American artists that maybe doesn't look like Native American art made years ago is kind of problematic. And also with like African art too, they kind of push the narrative of like how Africa is like so primitive, because all the same art they show is like very old and historic. Like you rarely see artists like the guy's name, like Hank Willis Thomas. He had like this whole exhibit. Like you don't see much of that. Like the art museum will just continue to have like all these like old pieces and continue to reinforce this like label of like African artists without realizing that there's people like Hank Willis Thomas and a bunch of like contemporary Black artists and even other people of color who aren't the stereotype or who don't fit the box of what a lot of, or what the art world would kind of like put them in to be. So even if like I don't make something that's like directly related to identity, simply having whatever it is that I make being viewed by people is good, because then that kind of shifts their, you know, impression or stereotype of what a typical Arab like person is.
Yeah, definitely. And it's about I think it's powerful to see art that's centered around experiences and around the people themselves in a community. Um, and like I was saying earlier, like that in itself is activism. I think sharing your voice, speaking up about your own experiences for a lot for a lot of people, I think that sometimes that's their first time like hearing about it or seeing about it in that way. Like you said with Hank Willis Thomas, because I was actually thinking about his art when you were talking about with jerseys, because he had his exhibit. I think it was called "All Things Being Equal" in the art museum, where he kind of blends like basketball culture, and ties like a lot of a lot of the things in sports, like when it comes to like jerseys or uniforms, and like tying it to like slavery, and just like African American history. And I think like that to me was like eye opening to see it in that way, um, and to look at art from an African American person who where his art was again like about centering African American experiences, but also looking at the ways that Black folks have been exploited throughout American history, and seeing how that's still happening now, but in different ways, and it looks different. Yeah.
Art museums really need to get with it, like with the modern art especially, because I get really tired of seeing, well, it's not bad, but I just get annoyed knowing how much they're trying to push this like kind of stereotype of what is like Native American art or what is like African art or art made by like Black Americans, when it's clearly different than it was like hundreds of years ago. And I think it's still good to show like history of art for sure, but when we're continuously ignoring the fact that there's a lot of contemporary artists out there like Hank Willis Thomas, and like only and not showing their work as much as we do to you know, as much in comparison to like their history, I think it can be damaging considering how many like white modern artists are given a platform more than like ancient like European art forms. Well, that's also given a lot more platform than anything. Just art museums are very white centered, and I think they need to kind of stop putting a lot of people of color in a certain box of what art they make, because yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And I even think that like people of color, Black Indigenous people of color who are artists, like their art doesn't even always need to revolve around their identity for it to be like seen as great. I think that like they should make art that they want to make for themselves, and that should still be considered great. I think, you know, it's wonderful when people center their identity in their art, and I think like that is a very important part of making art. But I think that like sometimes there's just like there's white artists who can just make art for themselves that doesn't center like their own identity, and that's seen acceptable, that's seen as wonderful, when sometimes really it's like mediocre.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Whereas like people of color who are artists, I feel like a lot of times for their work to be seen as great, it does have to be about their own experiences.
Mm-hmm. There's a quote, I think it's by Basquiat, but he says, like, I'm not a Black artist, I'm an artist, where, you know, because it's very easy to kind of expect what type of art is made from different identities. And I think he was, you know, always seen by a lot of like upper class white people that he's like strictly a Black artist, and like putting him in that box of like what art he can and can't make. And he was like, no, I'm just an artist. So I think being able to like kind of break down those labels is also like another form of liberation in the art world as well, like having um, people of color, LGBTQ, disabled, whatever identity that is like marginalized in this country, if they're able to kind of be seen on the same kind of playing field as white artists, like you said, and like just being able to produce work that doesn't even have to be about identity would be like a form of liberation. We're not at that point, but I think we're getting close, because especially with the Black Lives Matter movement now, a lot more places are kind of wanting to center, especially like Black art. So I think we're getting somewhere, but
Yeah.
it kind of feels like a stunt from a lot of these places. So I don't know how long it would last.
Yeah, I think we're taking baby steps, but we got a long road ahead of us. And I think that actually leads into my next question was like, how does the work that you do, or like, has there been work that you've been doing that relates to a lot of like what's been going on right now with the Black Lives Matter movement?
I did one drawing about cops and like compared them to pigs in like the very beginning, because I was like, y'all are pigs. So that's very true. I didn't want to like draw something about like the Black experience, because obviously I'm not Black, and that feels very wrong to do as an artist, to like do that, because obviously that makes no sense. So I was like, I'll just do drawing about cops because they're very annoying, and I think all these people can clearly see how much of a racist system the police are. And as we both know, pigs are haram. Don't mess with that. So yeah, I
Yep.
just like did a drawing about that and I felt like that was kind of like the only thing I could do because yeah, I was feeling very frustrated about like the police and stuff. So that's all I did. I don't think it would make sense for me to do art about the Black experience considering I'm not Black. Like that doesn't seem fair at all. So yeah, I think that's like the only thing I've done. Yeah. I was thinking a lot about like TSA just because I saw this like one picture on Twitter of a hijabi like patting down a white woman, and it was like the roles are
I
reversed. And
saw that.
I did a drawing of it. Yeah, I just thought it was super funny. Like the roles are reversed. But yeah, obviously they're not like the police in the streets, but I don't know. I just thought about them because they're like still police in a way. But I just thought it was so weird how Arab people are treated like by airport police versus like outside of the airport. You know, like I don't know. It just made me think of like privilege as like a non-Black POC. Like, sure, there's like Arabs I know like in my family who have been like racially profiled like by police like in public, but that rarely happens in comparison to like today's average like Black American. But when you go to the airport, it's like, you know, freedom for all for the police and Arab Americans. And I thought that was weird. Like, why is it in the airport they're so quick to racially profile them more so in public? But yeah, that made me think about like privilege a lot because I know that obviously isn't much of like a worry for me when I'm in public or like driving or anything. So yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I think that kind of makes me think about like the creation of TSA. It maybe was similar to that of like the creation of police, which was to patrol slaves long ways back. Whereas like the creation of TSA, I believe, was like right after 9/11.
Yeah.
So I
I
think
didn't
it's
think
interesting.
about that. I
Yeah,
didn't think
that's
about that at all. Whoa, that's kind of
yeah,
creepy.
yeah, right. I was just
Very
thinking about
creepy.
that. That's interesting to look. That's an interesting thing to look at because it's kind of like I think that America's reaction is to always like patrol and to
Yeah.
people have people as like
And
enforcers
like
rather.
low-key ice too.
And
Like ice.
yeah, mhm,
Whoa, this is I'm kind of
yeah,
having like a moment where my mind is being blown just thinking about like how all these things were created in response to like POC or even like just like doing something that white America is like really afraid of, and they're like, now we gotta like round them up. You
yeah,
know, that's
no,
like how police started, and now TSA and then ICE. Whoa.
yeah, no, definitely. It just makes me realize like how America's strategy is always to militarize in response to people of color, Black Indigenous people of color. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. When I go to New York for college, I plan on doing the same like photo project I did in Portland with like going to tourist attractions and doing that in New York because obviously there's like a lot of tourist attractions there, and one of them being like the memorial site. And I was thinking to get like a picture there just as a whole commentary on how that space has forever changed, you know, like my life. Because obviously Islamophobia was a thing for for Black Muslims especially. I think a lot of people forget that. They tend to think that like Islamophobia started when 9/11 started, which is obviously like not true. It definitely escalated it, but like it's been around even before that. And obviously being born in a post 9/11 world, I don't know what it's like to be in a world where that didn't happen, and maybe where me experiencing Islamophobia was like to a less extent than it is now. So I definitely want to get a picture there, whether that's like me in my normal clothes or maybe me in my jalabia and having that whole first generation kind of commentary on it, but definitely getting a picture there to kind of capture the way in which that event forever changes like every Muslim person's life in this country, regardless of race, honestly. Yeah. I don't know what, honestly, going there, I don't know what I'm gonna feel. Kind of scared, but like excited. I don't know. It's just kind of crazy to like see a place that literally is the center so much like racist and Islamophobic things I've heard in my life, and like seeing it, like that's just gonna be like a crazy moment for me.
Yeah, definitely. I think you'll do great though, and I think you'll just continue making great art. Um, and I believe like there is a huge Muslim community there, and I think like a huge Black Muslim community there as well. But yeah, I'm really excited for you.
Thank you. I hope to like meet like more people in the community, whether that's like at school or the guys that run the halal carts in New York, and like being able to make art about like their experience, or you know other like taxi drivers, because I know there's probably a lot of Arab or Muslim people doing that job. Um, but yeah, definitely wanting to engage more with like the community there, because it's a lot different than Portland. It's a tiny, tiny community of Muslim people here. Yeah. Oh, and I remember I wanted to say something about Lincoln too, because you brought up like paintings. I did this like one giant painting. It's like 3 feet by 11 feet, and it's like supposed to stand vertically. Um, and it's just a giant painting of a hijabi girl like with an abaya, and she's like posing with a skateboard, and written at the top is like, "What are you looking at?" in slang. And that's going to be in the new Lincoln, which I think will open like maybe 2-3 years from now. But the students won't know me. They'll probably like see my name like signed on it, but hopefully them like wherever they walk seeing that like painting, once again, like I've said a couple times, like normalize the way in which we view Muslim people and like Muslim women. And like I purposely did a hijab and abaya because that's like the easiest way for people to recognize a Muslim woman. And it's very obvious that not all Muslim women look like that. But having someone as like modest as they are posing with something like a skateboard that is like completely against that modesty, putting those two together, I think can make a lot of students, if they see it, think about it and be like, that's an interesting thing she's posing with. So yeah, hopefully people kind of appreciate that and instead not be disgusted and freaked out by it. I don't know how they're going to respond to it, but yeah, that'll go in the new Lincoln since my old one's like being destroyed.
That's really cool. That's exciting. Which I feel like it will shock a lot of people as well. People there. But yeah. Thank you so much, Tasneem. So those are all the questions that I had for you today. Do you have anything else that you want to add, or just say maybe closing statement?
I guess my closing statement would be, I guess when you're engaging with any person, whether like Arab Muslim female um, or particularly like about like Muslim people in general, a lot of people are always met with stereotypes, and they have all these things when they meet Muslim people, and it can be, I think, very damaging for a lot of Muslim people, because oftentimes, especially like first generation American Muslim people, are surrounded by like so many different expectations, whether that's like simply by the culture you're brought up in or even like as a gender. And I think people just need to come to the table or come to that like relationship just kind of abandoning those stereotypes they might have, like, oh, she's Muslim, she has strict parents, she can't like hang out with us or like do something. And oftentimes it's like not the case. I think people just need to realize how damaging stereotypes can be, and to kind of just put those to the side, get to know the person, and just kind of keep an open mind, especially like when viewing art, whether that's like my art or art made by other Muslim women, to kind of realize what story they're sharing, whether that's about, their family or about culture, and just kind of to realize like what exactly it is they're talking about, maybe not to, you know, quickly label them as like, oh, they're strictly, Muslim artists. Like at the end of the day, everyone's an artist, and you don't have to make art about your identity for it to be seen as like valid. So I feel like there's a lot more I could say, but that's really one of it, just keep an open mind, you know, treat everyone with kindness, you know, we see all the messages on Instagram now. everyone's saying, the same things. Extend that to everyone, every non-white, Christian, able-bodied male. I could keep going down the line straight, just really not to have stereotypes be the first thing when you're meeting that person,
Yeah. Thank you so much for being here
Thank you.
again.
It was fun.
I really appreciated talking to you. This was a great conversation. Yeah, this was a great time. I feel like it's been a while too since I've talked to you, so I really appreciate this.
Yeah, long time no
Yeah.
see.
And everyone, make sure to follow Tasneem on Instagram. Her it will be on the description, but it's I honestly don't know how to pronounce it. Tasneem.
Oh, basically, it's just Arabizi. It's a transliteration of min ayuni in Arabic, which is from my eyes. I don't know. I just say min 3 uni when I say
Okay.
it. Or
Yeah, because that's supposed to be
yeah,
the ayin, right, or something.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's
Okay.
a whole other thing to talk about, and I don't. Yeah.
Yeah. And then follow her art page as well, which is at Zikres, which is your last name backwards, but it's Z3KRAS. And then you also have a podcast, right? And so how can
Yeah,
people
I have
access that podcast?
people can access that on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Anchor, and a couple other podcast apps, but obviously those are the main ones a lot of people will go to. And that's just me interviewing other people talking about race, or kind of similar to what you guys do about intersectionality, and just talking to people, very casual, mainly catered to youth. I interview youth for the hopes of other youth listening and kind of being able to relate on that level.
Yeah. Sweet. Well, yeah, everyone make sure to, hype her up, follow her. And again, yeah, just thank you for being here. This was a great conversation.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. All right, bye.
Should I leave now?